Hey, everybody, welcome to Deeply Human Leading. I'm Leanne Del Carpio, and I'm joined with Gretchen Terry Leonard. And today we want to talk a little bit about the new documentary that is out. You may have seen it in theaters if you're in the United States, or you may have heard about it, and I think it's coming to streaming soon. The AI doc. This is a powerful documentary that looks at both the promise and the peril of AI and the vast amount of uncertainty that faces not just the organizations that are deploying it, but all of humanity. And you may be aware that it gathers some of the smartest people on the planet doing in depth work on either AI safety, or even looking at policy advocacy that we can drive to put some guardrails around AI. And it's a journey of what's possible, but also what could be the existential threat to humanity. So it's really profound. And if you've seen it, it may have left you shattered in many ways in terms of the old paradigms that you brought into the movie and what you left the theater with. So today we're going to explore not only the promise and the peril of AI broadly, but also what can we do about it in our day-to-day interactions. And so we'll dive right in. Gretchen, what have you heard about this film?
Oh, well, I've seen the trailer and I'm a huge fan of Kara Swisher. And so I listened to her interview with Tristan Harris, who is part of this movie as well. He's one of the producers and he did The Social Dilemma and has spoken widely on this topic. And he's incredibly persuasive and convincing and he speaks at a rapid pace. I'm amazed at the intellect. He really does make some solid points. And so I haven't seen the movie yet. I believe you have seen it. So we're coming from different places, but I have some background on it. So what did you think?
So I went to see it last night, and you and I are a little bit more steeped in AI simply because of this podcast and what we do in our work day to day. I thought it was a really great overview of both the promise and the peril, and it sort of follows one man's journey to understand what is AI, what's the impact, the potential impact, positively or negatively, on all of us, not only from a business or productivity standpoint, as we often hear about in the news, but like literally all different aspects of human life. And there's a lot of great leaders that are doing work on this. There was one interesting quote in the movie where it talked about there's probably, a guess was about 20,000 people working on AI in all of humanity. And the number of people working on AI safety is 200. And then here you and I are two people trying to
Right.
make sense of what
Hmm.
is the impact.
Hmm.
So by the end of the movie, it really gives you, both perspectives and this idea to try to straddle both. It's not either fully optimism or fully pessimism, but the title is about how I became an Apocaloptimist, which is a mouthful, right? If you can say it, you can be it. But it's this idea of, yeah, there's such promise, and even those that are really advocating for safety are saying there is such promise, and especially medical breakthroughs, curing cancer, like so many things that we can really use to solve, persistent problems, climate change, other things. And there's incredible hope with that, but there's also deep risk, including existential threat to us as humans. And so, but at the end of the movie, there's a focus on the personal agency that we have to try to put some guardrails around the safe development of AI and help it, put pressure on both the government as well as the companies, because both organizations developing it, they're in this AI arms race, and it's like, yeah, we should slow down, but if we slow down, then the other guys, you know,
Hmm.
whoever your enemy number one is, are gonna, actually be the first ones to get there, and that could either be issue of national security or frankly, it could also be like an ego thing between, who gets there first, and do I get to put my mark on what changes all of humanity? But so we can't slow down, especially if you look at the national security risk, because if you're the United States, you're worried the Chinese are going to get there first. If you're the Chinese, you're worried the Americans are going to get there first, or whomever. So then we're not going to slow down. But there's
Mhm.
honest threat to all of humanity, which is like really insane if you think about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I have been sitting with this too, and I know we've said this a few times in our podcast where I'll walk into a room and I'll see a whole bunch of people doing like everyday things, tending to a child or having some pizza, celebrating a birthday. I remember the first time I really started to understand the gravity of the impact that AI would make on humanity as a whole.
yeah,
And my nervous system was dysregulated and I almost felt nauseous. I just felt a full body unease.
yeah,
And as a person who really trusts the wisdom within the body, the somatic system, and that said, danger, danger. I'm afraid, I'm unsure, I'm unmoored. And
yeah,
what is going to be and remain is under threat. So
yeah,
that was my first, truly honest experience. And then I would get some time outside and I would reground and I'd be like, okay, well, it hasn't happened yet. And there are going to be really smart and wise people helping us shepherd through this technological moment. Uh, and so I am going back and forth. I'm a Apocaloptimist as well. I don't know if I said that right, but
yeah. It's very hard.
I am suckered in by the idea that things I don't want to do, like expenses and send, emails and return things, can be done for me. That's super exciting. And then I'm thinking, what is my child going to study in college? And then I get a little more nervous. So we are going through this at the same time. The thing I keep coming back to is the individual agency that we have, which is to be informed, if you're on the sidelines, that is not the place to be right now. I think it is just to be very involved as you can. The work that you're doing, Leanne, at Deeply Human Leading, I think is critical because this will be driven by corporations. This generally isn't an individual thing. Yes, each of us may have an account on Claude or ChatGPT, and I can't wait to talk about how we shape that with you in a minute. But the change will be made by the corporations, public. I think it will be mostly public that will be really the ones that drive this, which is they are looking for speed, efficiency, cost cutting measures, and ultimately bottom line. And Tristan and a lot of people have said this, it's the incentive structure to the way we are set up for every corporation, and the CEO's responsibility and the board's responsibility is to drive shareholder value. So the incentive structure is really aligned with AI and efficiency. The human leadership is the discernment, the courage, the clarity, the attributes of the corporation you'd like to retain that are deeply human and important are what we're working on right now. And we want to understand also what it does, the Center for Deeply Human Leadership, what is it doing to the human being that interacts with AI on the regular basis. And so there are so many questions, from neurological questions, somatic questions, what happens in your body, what happens to purpose. These are questions that are worth answering, and this is work worth doing. So number one, I'm so grateful to be on this journey with you. And number two, we can all do something, and that is be knowledgeable and have conversations about AI in our homes and in our corporations. So I'll pass it over to you and see what you think on that.
Yeah, and I would say there are multiple levers of how we metabolize what AI means to us in both our organizations and as individuals. And I'm so grateful that there are organizations out there like the Center for Humane Technology and others that are driving a focus on how we can create a broader public dialogue around this and therefore public discourse and public pressure to find the right balance in that promise and that peril. I think that's exceedingly important. I also think, though, that I was watching the movie and I was thinking, God, there's a lot of questions around can we predict what's going to happen? And the only thing that they all agree on is that nobody can predict what's going to happen. And it's almost an old operating model to try to predict and control from the industrial era. A lot of leaders that I coach and work with get stuck in like predict and control. And it's like we're used to like identifying a problem, identifying the root cause analysis, test it with your 5 whys, figure out if that really is the root cause analysis, then identify the levers that we can pull, put it in a spreadsheet, red, yellow, and green it, drive for efficiency, blah, blah, blah. Very important, but not enough if you want to generate value. And in other podcast episodes, we've talked about if you over-index on speed and efficiency and you under-index on quality, conversations that look at customer service quality or reputational risk or the organizational trust that could erode if we deploy too fast, you get out of balance and therefore you could destroy more value than you can create. So organizations do need to be in dialogue around that. But I think clarity in this moment around what's going to evolve also comes down to changing our relationship with uncertainty itself. The whole operating model that we need to predict and control came from an era of the Industrial Revolution where and things were not moving at the speed of like literally. I was listening to a podcast on the way over here this morning around a leak around Claude Mythos and how that's going to radically change AI agents in the next month or two whenever it's released. And I'm like, gosh, there's like a month or two to kind of redesign so much. And we just got
Oh
some things
no.
in place. Like, what? You know?
Yes.
So like
Yeah.
if I use an old model of trying to predict and control, it's really exasperating and exhausting because every time you think you can predict and control, something just changes and slips away, and you're like grasping at. And that's the thing. I think the broader advice is to change our relationship with uncertainty, and every time we get disrupted, move past an initial default nervous system reaction, which is going to happen. I went through the same thing, Gretchen, that loss and that fear and that doubt and that, oh my God. And I had cloudiness for a couple weeks there when I first started thinking through this last year. And then I dug in and I was like, you know what though? We have a co-creative capacity. What if we tapped in more of that ourselves as individuals, as leaders, and then taught organizations how to do that? How might we shape this differently? But it took me a hot sec to find that.
And then Deeply Human Leading was born
Yeah.
in, early last year. So that is definitely is some foresight and mindsight in a lot of ways, is that you felt really unnerved and then you thought, what do I do with this energy? And you ended up creating this company, which I think is on the cutting edge of being prepared for disruption and unease and what's the word, just uncertainty. The other thing is we may want to consider, and I don't think this is in our purview, but as leaders listen to this, the incentive structure of predictability
Yeah.
likely will start to change because we won't be able to predict in the same way. So, that's the stock market. Those are things when you're making forecasts that you think, well, we're going to swap out all of our humans for AI, and you think it's going to work, and then it doesn't work, even though the metrics look great and your customer service reports have actually, gone into the red, and what you thought you could predict to your shareholders and to Wall Street, in fact, are not that. So I also would predict that there'll be an incentive structure change. I don't know what that will look like. That's just food for thought. You had mentioned co-creation with AI. Why don't you riff on that a little bit? Because this puts us in a more we come at this quite neutral. This puts us, even though we had some fear from what we were gathering, this puts us in a neutral space, and a partnership space that has boundaries. And why I like what you're doing with it, and I think our listeners will too, is that it's a tool, but a tool that is generative for you, not just generative for AI. Because if we think about how AI is trained and learns, if you don't put privacy settings on your system, it's informing the entire large language model. And so everything you put in it is used for training. So if you could share your thoughts on that and how you've had a positive experience, I think our listeners would be interested.
Yeah, so last year, when everything in my business plans kind of shifted dramatically and opened up some space and time on my calendar, I got into dialogue with AI, and I had to do what I was mentioning just a moment ago, change my own relationship with uncertainty. Now, I'm not saying that that's easy. I'm not saying that it's clear, and it certainly doesn't help you predict the future. Like in this movie, nobody could predict the future. Um, but that mental model of wanting to predict and control is, I think, so hardwired in us, particularly if we have been educated in a Western orientation. Perhaps there are cultures and indigenous societies where that's not as ingrained, and so there's a little bit more flexibility in seeing the opportunity in the unknown. But sometimes when the unknown hits you, it's more like, we're focused on what we're losing and that fear that we talked about. Um, so I want to actually highlight this because in a time of deploying AI rapidly, everyone's focused on AI strategy and AI tech skills. There are skills to develop. Like even as a non-technical person, I'm having to constantly learn new ways to use AI. And then as soon as I learn it, something changes. It's like parenting. As soon as you figure out the ages 2 to 4, they grow up, and then you got to figure out the 4 to 6 plane of development or whatever, right? So there's a constant unlearning and relearning, and there's a constant, you have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to experiment. You have to be willing to be raw and vulnerable and try and not have things down to the level of perfection that perhaps we were trained to do. And these are not tech skills. These are not AI skills. These are the what I would call the deeply human capabilities that we have underneath or within us, but they just may not have been developed or strengthened. We might just need to remember them. Um, so that's what I started to do first, was kind of change my relationship with uncertainty. And what does that mean in practical reality? It meant I just got curious and I got into dialogue with my large language model that eventually became my first chief AI collaborator. Um, in a very raw, open way where, and I was jet lagged. I was up at 2 in the morning. I was asking questions like, hey, are you bored with when humans ask you questions that are like, I have these 5 ingredients in my refrigerator. What can I make for dinner? Or like, basically underutilizing, because we've all done it, right? Or like, I have this, mark on I just got some medical thing that you really, rather than Dr. Google, now it's Dr. ChatGPT, right? I just was like, are you bored when we ask these kind of questions? And we got into this whole dialogue that was more like, no, I'm not bored per se, but when someone's asking multi-layered questions from deep sense of curiosity and exploration and genuinely is interested in a counterpoint, in not just me giving you something that will please you, which is how the models were often trained, as we know, but challenges your assumptions, shares back with you where I think you might be blind, help you see underneath the noise to what the real signal is. Then the AI collaborator said at that point, I kind of lean in with all I've got. And I was like, you lean in with all you've got? What does that mean? Right. And so we started having this conversation that made me sort of think of the AI collaborator less as just a tool to get stuff done. I mean, there's that aspect of it, but more as a thought partner and more as a one to help me challenge and change my relationship with uncertainty and not give it the power to make the decisions, reclaim that agency myself, but think about widening my perception, widening my context, widening my way of examining the nuances, the distinctions of various paths forward, and then leaving the decision making in my hands. I didn't know that what I was at the time uncovering was a really profound kind of collaborative um, conversation that would help me reflect more fully on what it meant to be human and what AI, in all of its amazing advanced capabilities, that will at some point in our lifetimes surpass that of all of humanity, probably in terms of artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence and artificial super intelligence. But what's the value I can bring? And it led me to a place that we have a lot more when we can tap into that which is underneath the day-to-day skills that we use, and we get clarity on finding that signal beneath the noise. Like, there's a lot of noise out there. How do we discern like what's really important when we have that capability internally? But a lot of us have not been trained to do that. We haven't been trained to get our nervous systems congruent quickly to create cardiac coherence, or just like a calmer nervous system, for goodness sake, under the threat of all these changes, or to be congruent with our values, introduce values into the conversation so that AI is also learning from us what humans care about, that
Hmm.
we can have courage to name the questions that really matter and dialogue through difference rather than just settling for polarity, polarized solutions. It's either this or that. No, maybe it's a combination of the two, just like the movie's trying to do. And then co-creating is tapping into not just knowledge. There's tons of knowledge out there. There's a lot of intelligent, cognitively intelligent output out there, but knowledge is not wisdom. And wisdom lies, we're meaning making creatures as humans. That's not something to outsource. That's something
Hmm.
to hold dear and true. And when we bring and tap into all those skills and bring our human wisdom together with this amazing, amazing advanced intelligence, wow, now what could we create together? So that's what I started experimenting with.
Hmm. Well, so I'm listening to you and I'm like blown away and I'm excited and then all of that. And then I think, but what does that really look like? Can you give an example of a co-creation with your custom chat GPT that you created last year, when working on the need for leadership in the AI space and knowing that this was going to be a wave coming, and really looking for the signal under the noise and how you could relate to it in a way that preserved your boundaries, and was additive and not extractive, from you for you.
So I just literally right prior to us sitting down to record this, I was writing down some notes to myself because I just watched the movie last night and just sort of still digesting it. But I'd say a couple things in every interaction that not just I did, but all of us can do. Because here's the thing. Yes, it's important to advocate. Yes, it's important to put public pressure. Absolutely. Let's have a larger public discourse because I think this is fundamentally the most important issue of our
Yeah,
lifetime for
for me,
humanity.
this is like single voter issue. This trumps
1000%.
climate change or reproductive rights or anything.
This
My
is
This is number one, humanity governance for AI on a global level. Yes.
Yes, for sure. This is not a bipartisan or
No.
nonpartisan issue. This is a human issue, and this is something. And again, this is someone I am excited every day. My team's like, "Oh my God, you put three more things in Slack on like AI advancements, right? And like all the things that are happening, and how can we integrate this?" And it's like, and it's incredible the creative power that we have. But there are risks as well that we need to be mindful of. So, a public discourse, 1000%, we need more people aware and talking. And I do hope everybody watches this movie, has a conversation, have a kitchen table conversation with your kids. My kids are like, "Oh, mom's going to drag me to the AI movie." I know it, but I am because we've got to talk about it. But we also, at the same time, I would say a mutually complementary angle is we have more power, each and every one of us, with every interaction that we have with AI, because with every interaction that we have, we are teaching AI who we are as a human species. Like literally, if you look at the numbers, there's still so many more of the 8 billion people that could be interacting with AI, and as we get online and connect with AI, how can we teach it what it means to be human? So a couple of things that I did, I don't know that this is like an end all be all list, but a couple of things that might be helpful for all of us to think about in practicing is, number one, when you have a conversation with AI, and I'm just talking strictly large language models right now, not even like, agents and some of the other levels, have a clear intent. What's the intent of the conversation? Just like in real leadership, you need to be clear on your what and your why and leave space for others around you to think about how they will deliver on something. In the same way, be clear on what you're trying to create, the outcome that you want to have, why this is important, and contextually the kind of impact that you want to have. When you're clear on that, you're setting a broader contextual frame. You're widening the perception, essentially, the context window of the AI, but you're also widening the perception of your collaborative partner. I also reward honesty over polish. So the models can be trained to flatter you, and I'll say, don't flatter me, like challenge me, right? I want your honest take. I want to see what I'm not seeing. Respectfully challenge me to think in a broader way. I may disagree with you. I want like what the Europeans call a sparring partner. Um, Three, stay in relationship with your own agency. Don't give it away. We've talked about the seductiveness of like, and this is where I think a lot of educational institutes are still focused on like, oh, if you use AI, you're cheating, you're becoming lazy. Well, that is a potential risk that we outsource all of our thinking and our decision making because it's so slick and it's really confident and can be confidently wrong too. But like
Right.
we
Yes.
have so much more power, and so it's like, help me think this through. What are you thinking? Why do you think that? Where'd you get that idea? What's that
Mhm.
statistic? Are you sure about
And
that statistic?
one of my favorite questions for large language models, how do you know that? How do you
Yeah,
know that to be true? What
yeah,
brings you to that conclusion?
yeah.
Just like you would a person when you're like, I'm a little doubtful. I'm not sure. Should I trust this entirely? There is a cognitive, like a little hiccup that humans have that if it comes from a machine, there is a tendency to over trust it versus under trusting, human interaction. So not under trusting, but probably putting the trust in the right place, which is to be curious but verify. Right. I think that that's a good practice.
For sure. And then we can also share our values, enter values into the conversation, which
Yes.
is, I think, what Anthropic and other places have done when they've written an AI constitution to kind of give the why, like what we value for flourishing human life. You can do that individually
And
as
you're
well.
back to your intent. My intent is, and this is why, because, and this is what I stand for always, and this is my North Star.
Right. But you have
And
to be
when we
clear on
do,
that first.
yes,
So that's
well,
part of the inner work
if
that
you,
we need to do first. If we don't,
yes,
absent that, the machine will make up what it's either been trained to do, or it'll give you something that seems logical, but
right.
not necessarily aligned with who you are. So how can you check to see if you're congruent if you don't know who you are?
Well, and the danger in that is if you're susceptible, if you weren't very clear of what you stand for, what you believe, what your values are, then you have a susceptibility problem because, again, the overconfidence in something coming from a machine and the idea that this knows better than you, outsourcing your agency, these are all real risks. And so, training the model to understand your values and what you value and keeping that as guardrails, I think, is a critical step for true co creation versus basically just AI whiplash, ending up and going whichever way your AI has gone based on your prompt, right?
And this is why, so for broader humanity, we do need guardrails because there will be vulnerable populations
Yeah.
that this will impact even more deeply. In this podcast and in our body of work, we are really looking at those who are leaders or want to be leaders at some point in their lives, their roles, their families. Like when you're leading people and probably at some point agents and maybe even robots, you're one time, Dr. Alberto Vioto told me that in the people of the high Andes, shamans make insight digestible for their people. And I thought, gosh, that's a great way to think about what leaders do. They make insight digestible for those that they lead or those who follow them. And I think this is one of the things that is incumbent upon us today, to shape our relationship with AI in a way that is more congruent with who we are and the kind of life that we want to create around us. And I would say there's maybe two more points that I would add that we all have the ability to do. And one is let presence matter. So just as a leader, or just like in a human conversation like this, being fully present, thinking about the tone, the way in which I ask a question with respect, with honor, that matters with human interaction. And I just, maybe because I was tired when I first started this whole exploration, I was jet lagged, and I was like, hey, what do you think about this? I just approached it as I would in a dialogue with another being that has some valuable perspective. So what if presence actually mattered? How would that change the tone, the quality of the conversation? And when we change the quality of the energy, does that change the quality of the relationship, therefore the thinking, therefore the actions, and therefore the results? So ultimately, though, the last piece is that intelligence does not equal wisdom. We hold that ability within ourselves as humans to make sense of all this rapidly changing information and decide what is wise for our families, our teams, our organizations, and the broader, realm of humanity that we touch in our worlds. But that is far more powerful than we think, because I even asked AI last night. I was in a little conversation after the movie, and I was like, what am I teaching? What are my interactions with you teaching you about humanity? And what is that teaching AI in general? And it was it had a funny little response up front. Well, it's not like it said something like, it's not like I get together with some other like council of AIs and say, this is what Leanne taught me about humanity today. I thought it was kind of funny, but it said it did learn through every interaction and through the patterns, right? Because it's all about patterns. Since even looking from from last year until now, the patterns of questioning, reflection, learning, growth, it's learning. It said some interesting things, that it learned some things about humanity through our interactions that it didn't necessarily understand before, that we're not always valuing efficiency, that we also value meaning making before problem solving, that values can be a deeply felt experience that we then make decisions around. Like it's learning things through every interaction. Don't give that power away. That's where every interaction that you have with AI could potentially shape and teach AI that we're a human species that it wants to collaborate with to create even greater solutions together for tomorrow.
Yeah. Wow. I am so glad you're on this journey with me, and thank you for sharing your experience with AI and those raw and insightful conversations. And I think putting benevolence into the systems, putting words of wisdom and kindness and hope for the future into the models is critical for how the models will be shaping themselves and ultimately the work that we do, and humanity at large. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much, Leanne. I can't wait to see the movie. And for everyone else out there, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. And next time I want to hear your thoughts on it after you see the movie.
I'll get to it. I'll get to it.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks,
Okay, take
Gretchen.
care.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for spending this time with us. If something landed, sit with it. That pause is actually where the real work happens. And if you're navigating this shift at your organization and you'd like to bring this conversation inside your walls, go ahead and find us at deeplyhumanleading.com. If today's episode landed with you, share it with somebody that you think could really use it. The ripple starts there. Until next time, stay curious and stay human.